How's it going, friends? The video you're watching is about to be the best education you'll be able to find anywhere on the internet in this short of an amount of time as it relates to buying a home. This is, it's not just for first-time home buyers. It's for anybody who hasn't bought a house in the last year. Think of it as a refresher if you have bought a home before, and an update. And if you are a first-time home buyer, definitely start here. How's it going, friends? My name is Jesse Lynch. I run the hardest working real estate team in the game. We're called To the Twin Cities. You can check out our website, tothetwincities.com. But this YouTube channel is all about helping you find a place to call home here in the beautiful Twin Cities of Minnesota. And really, relocations is what we do. It's what we focus on. It's what we do better than anybody else. So if that sounds interesting to you, then do me a favor, do yourself a favor, subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so yet. Click the little bell to get notified. Leave a comment, like the video if you would, or whatever. Wait till halfway through the video, like it then, because there's going to be a ton of information heading your way. And if you're interested in working with us, you can go to our website, tothetwincities.com. We have a contact form there that you can fill out in like 30 seconds or less, and then we'll get the show on the road, get things headed in the right direction. Or you can shoot us an email directly to info@tothetwincities.com. They lead to the same spot. Personally, I think the website is the best way to go. You don't need to include a whole bunch of information. That will kind of be one of the next steps coming up. Sound good? Good. For this video, I'm going to be assuming that you're going to be working with me and my team and the agents on my team, but also the other sort of characters who will be involved. They're not characters, they're very good people, but the other people playing really important roles in the transaction. That way, at least I know that what I'm telling you is a really good representation of how things will go. Other agents, other teams, other brokerages may do things differently, but this is how we do it, and we've gotten very, very good at this, specifically helping buyers who are out of state. So if we can help somebody who's in a different country, right, then we can help you if you live in the Twin Cities, right? So just know that we've gotten really good at the most complicated buyer situations. So anything less complicated should be pretty much a cakewalk for us and our team. I'm gonna be talking through a 5-step process here. And obviously within each step, there are many steps. Home buying takes time. It takes a lot of effort from y'all. It takes a tremendous amount of effort from us, and we will get you there. So step 1 is just reach out to us. Right? That's how most of the people that we're working with, they just reach out to us first. And then we kind of go, okay, cool, here's the next step. So this video is hopefully just going to help prep you for what that's all gonna look like. But step 1 is reach out to us. And to give a very broad timeline, you could reach out whenever you want. I have people who reach out who are 5 years out. I will say that's pretty early. That's a lot could change in 5 years. I think that's probably a touch too early. But a lot of people reach out in the 6-month window. That's a perfect window. 1-year window, that's also a perfect window, especially with the relocation. There's so many things to be considering that I tend to think the sooner the better. 2 years out, that's again getting a little bit early, but super reasonable if you have a lot of things that have to fall into place. And I would say it's got to be at least 5 weeks before you have to close on a house. Unless you're a cash buyer, then I guess it could be like 3 weeks, but that's going to be an unbelievably condensed timeline, and I wouldn't put that kind of pressure on yourself. I think six months is the sweet spot before you're going to start looking, or 6 months before you have to be in a home. That's a really, really comfortable spot, but 6 months, a year, 2 years, somewhere in that is kind of that sweet spot for that window. If you're unsure about your financial situation, whether that's because you are from a different country or you're having an interesting job change or something like that, the sooner the better. And we will eventually talk about financing and all of that, but the sooner the better if you are very unsure about some of those steps. That way we can put you in contact with the people that you need to be in contact with. And so when you reach out to us, or like earlier, like I said, through our website, tothetwincities.com, where there's a contact form. You'll just enter some contact information, and then we'll reach out back to you, and we'll set up a Zoom call. And basically, the Zoom call, we'll use something called Calendly, which if you don't know is a very very handy automated scheduling tool that works directly with Zoom, and you find a time that works for you. You say, cool, 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 12th or whatever, and then boom, you got it, you've reserved that time, and then myself, somebody on the team, or a combination of myself and somebody on the team will be able to accommodate that. And Calendly is a very slick app. It will send reminders, it will automate to whatever time zone you're in. So when you're choosing, you choose your time zone, and then it'll show you what times are available for your time zone. So if you live in the Philippines, well, then you're gonna have a very different time than what we're gonna have over here. But there's pretty much always gonna be some overlapping time, right? Our very early morning, our late evening may work with the time that works for you as well. And so then we'll hop on a Zoom call, and it's not a short Zoom call. Don't take it lightly. Please have time available to chat. At least 90 minutes long is what the majority of these Zoom calls seems to take to really get through everything we need to. If it's shorter than that because you have certain ducks in a row, or you know exactly where you want to live or something like that, then great, then it's shorter than that. But be prepared for a 90-minute Zoom call. We take that first Zoom very seriously. We want to be really, really helpful and just clear up so much of the questions and so much of the concerns that people have as they're considering a relocation, considering a home purchase. In that Zoom call, we'll answer a bunch of questions. We'll talk through the home search, both the house and the location, and kind of find where the right spot is for you based on the lifestyle that you're looking for. And I don't want to understate that. If you're relocating, that's the magic. That's the thing that we do better than anybody else, is helping you pinpoint where you want to be. That's what our YouTube channel is very much about, helping you at least begin to dive down that. And then when you're working with us on the Zoom call, that's where we can really get granular to what your wants and needs are out of a neighborhood, out of an area. There are things that we can't say, we can't steer you, right, based on protected classes, but we're really good at having the conversation based on lifestyle, not based on anything to do with any protected class, because I actually don't think that that's a helpful way to find the right neighborhood. Those things don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. The lifestyle is the thing that you're looking for, and that's what we get really good at helping you find. And so in that Zoom call, as we're talking through neighborhoods that you're interested in, as we're talking through what you want out of a house, we'll set up what's called an MLS search, which is also known as a multiple listing service. This is all sort of tied into that Zoom call, but we're gonna ask you the criteria for the house. So bedroom, bathroom, garage stalls, is there a requirement, square footage requirements, ages of the home? Do you have any guidelines on that? Do you specifically want an old home? Do you specifically want a new home? Something in between? And then most importantly, and this is probably one of the longer parts of the conversation, is pinpointing the locations that you want, right? And there's a bunch of questions that we'll ask to get you there, but we've got all that stuff figured out. Just be prepared to think about and dream about the perfect lifestyle that you want out of living here, buying a home, owning a home here in the Twin Cities. If you're new to this channel, if this is the first video that you've watched and you really don't have any idea about what neighborhoods you're interested in, subscribe to this channel. This channel has a video on just about every single suburb and just about every single neighborhood throughout the Twin Cities. And we really try to make this channel the best resource for relocating to the Twin Cities, the most in-depth, the most immersive videos anywhere on the internet. And yeah, we have a ton of back catalog. So if there's any neighborhood you're interested in, search for it on this channel. And if you don't even know what neighborhood you're interested in, just start going down the rabbit hole, start checking out these videos. And with that MLS search, you can choose how often you want to be getting those emails. I'd say most people go for once or twice a day, right? Getting an email once or twice a day, depending on how far out they are. It's all automated. That's not us sending you that email every day. But there's also the option to have a house show up ASAP, or an email gets sent the second a house hits the market in your search. Depending on how specific your search is, how specific the home and the neighborhood is, and how few listings there may or may not be, ASAP could be the perfect option. But if you're getting 200 houses in your search, like right when we start looking it up, ASAP will be crazy. You might be getting 20 to 40 emails on a Thursday, right? Which is probably more than most people would want. And one common concern that comes up is the age of a home. And people are maybe from somewhere where there aren't really old homes. There aren't homes built in the early 1900s. And I would say that if you are unaware of the older home, I would say consider it. A lot of people think that an old home is going to be a house that automatically comes with a bunch of issues. And I think that there are many homes built in the, let's say the 1920s or the 1930s that have been maintained so well and are in such good shape today that I would prefer a home from the 1930s, which is like 90 some years old, over a home built in the 1990s. Not any home in the 30s over any home in the 90s, but there are homes that are built in the 90s or the 2000s that have been neglected. And 20 years of neglect is enough for a house to be in a really, really poor state. Whereas a home that's 90 years old, that's been cared for, that home is likely in better condition. So just a common question, a common concern, an FAQ, if you will. And then at the end of that Zoom call, we do a couple things. Like I said, we send those automated emails, the MLS search. We set up a group text, whether it's myself and you, and whoever you're buying with, myself and an agent and whoever you're buying with. That's the most common situation. And so we set up a group text and we basically just have that there as a line of communication that's available to you, and we will not bother you. We will not be an annoyance through that group text. And it's very important that you know that that's out of respect, and that if we're not messaging you randomly out of the blue, out for no reason at all, it's not because we're disinterested in working with you. It's out of respect because we know that you know that that line of communication is open, and you should know, I hope you know now watching this, that we are available whenever you need us. Then we'll also send out an email that just has some information, some blank contracts and things like that. Just information that we have found to be helpful. And we also have another video somewhat like this, somewhat akin to this, that is sort of okay, now you're working with us. Here's a specific video, a continuation of this video, if you will, about what you need to know now that we're working together. Then from there, we hang up the Zoom call and we move on to step 2, which is pre-approval, financing, or just more vaguely money talk. In this, we're going to talk about lenders, we're going to talk about closing costs, we're going to talk about commissions and how we get paid. And if you're a cash buyer, things will be different. So a lot of these numbers are going to be different if you're paying all cash, and that would be for a different video, or that can be a conversation that we have in a Zoom call separately. But just know that a lot of these numbers just skew completely different if you're using cash. Timelines, everything changes if you're using cash. So if you're getting financing, or if you're procuring financing, or using a lender, there's a few things that I just want to make sure that I'm on the record about. And if you follow any real estate agents or anything like that, you'll probably have heard this. It becomes a little bit of a cliche, which is that they say that it's really good to have a good local lender. I tend to agree with this. And so what I'd like to be on the record saying is that having a local lender is super important. But more than that, having a lender who's done a lot of transactions locally is super important. So it doesn't really matter where they're located. If somebody lived in Minnesota and moved to Illinois but still lends in Minnesota a lot, it doesn't really matter that their address is in Minnesota. It just matters that they've done a ton of transactions in Minnesota and understand the nuances of a Minnesota transaction. That said, I would say don't use a big bank. I'm not going to name any names in particular on this video, but there are a lot of large mortgage branches of banks. You might bank at them. I bank at one. I bank at a bank that I like as a bank, and in a million years I would not use as a lender. So don't use the big banks. I can pretty much guarantee you will have a worse experience if you use a big bank. I think you're just kind of a name on a spreadsheet with those big banks. At least make sure, if you do, that there is a reliable person on the other end, and that you're not calling a hotline, and that that person really knows what they're talking about. My experience has been a lot of the big banks don't attract the best talent in terms of brokers, in terms of lenders, and you will find that communication and experience are some of the most important things as it pertains to a real estate transaction. So use a local lender, or at least somebody who's super familiar with local lending and local transactions. Don't use a big bank. And if I had my way, I have one lender who everybody would work with because I have a really, really great relationship with him, and he has proven himself to me over and over and over again. There's quite a few vendors, in fact, that if I had my way, everybody would use, and it's because they've proven themselves to me. I had a client a little while ago who said he wanted the deluxe package, right? And I had never thought of it that way, but I think that is the right way of saying it, is that if you work with me, the agents on my team, and all of the other people that we've worked with consistently, that is the deluxe package. That is the highest likelihood of success, the lowest likelihood of problems. And so I will connect you with his lender, whom I've worked with, who literally have done a couple hundred transactions with, I think, something like that. And he will ask you for 5 documents. If you use another lender, you will reach out to them, right? But if you use this one particular lender, I will make the introduction because we've worked together on so many transactions with so many clients that if he knows you come from me, he'll take just the best care of you as possible. If you use another lender other than the one that I hope you do, you won't hurt my feelings. It's okay. But again, if I had my way, everybody would use this one. If you want to use a different lender, you can reach out to them. You probably just would reach out to them by phone or by email. If you're using my preferred, my recommended lender, then I will make the introduction to him over email. I'll just send an email connecting y'all, and that I basically back out of that conversation after that. So one question a lot of people ask is, how long does a pre-approval last? Pretty simply, 90 to 120 days, and it depends on the lender. And some people will try to be really careful with how early they ask for the pre-approval, depending on when they're ultimately going to buy a home. I do think it's not, a bad idea to be just cautious of too many credit pulls. But in my experience, and this is not lending advice, a credit pull for a mortgage inquiry is actually not that catastrophic to one's credit. And I've asked quite a few clients, how much did that impact your credit, that credit pull? I've only ever heard as many as like 10, or the really, really low double-digit points as far as the hit that they took. And I pretty much asked everybody, by the time you closed, by the time that 90 to 120 days cycled, was it back? And they had all said yes. So that's all I know. This is not lending advice. I would assume that there are maybe some nuances depending on how many inquiries you've had for other things, but that's been my experience. That's really just been my feedback, is that by the time that credit pull cycles, you're kind of back to where you were. So I'll connect you with my preferred lender, and he will ask you for like 5 documents or so. If you talk to another lender, pretty sure they're going to ask you for the same exact documents. So the first is going to be the 2 years complete federal 1040 tax returns. If you're self-employed, they're going to want all schedules, business, and K-1 returns, if those are applicable. They're going to ask for the 2-year previous W-2s, or again, if you're self-employed, they're going to ask for the 1099s. But basically, 2 years of income, 2 years of proof of how the income came in. Then they're going to ask for the 3 most recent pay stubs. Again, if it's 1099s, right? Basically, how did the money come in the last 3 times? They're going to ask for the most recent 2 full months of banking and asset statements. That includes all pages, even if some pages are blank. I don't know why they do blank pages, but they do. And this can all just be in the form of a PDF, right? So any way that you can get these, probably a downloadable PDF. Maybe you have them available. Maybe rewind this, write those down, and get those items available for when you end up reaching out to a lender or getting connected with a lender. Then you're also going to want a copy of your driver's license or some government ID. Not everybody has a driver's license, so some government ID. Then you're going to submit that into a portal, at least with the guy that I like to use. And then you're going to submit all those PDFs into like a protected portal. And then something happens on the other side, lender grabs it, works a bunch of magic, and boom, you're pre-approved. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that, but this lender in particular has sort of wizard-like qualities, and so I don't really know everything that happens. My financing understanding is pretty close to probably a 5th grade level. He's like, doctorate probably level of the financing and of the nuances surrounding financing. One very common question is, how much money do you need for a down payment? That's a huge question. And it varies really dramatically. But how much do you need? I would say actually much lower than you think. I have videos on basically first-time home buyer, how much does it cost to buy a home on this channel. But you could use a down payment assistance program and be out of pocket like $0. If you're buying a rural home, you could use a USDA loan. That could be a $0 down payment loan. If you're using a VA loan because you're a veteran, that's also a 0% down payment. If you were choosing not to use any kind of down payment assistance, then 3% is probably the lowest you'll see for a more traditional, conventional style loan. There's also 3.5, that's an FHA loan. But long story short, if funds are the hardest thing for you to come by, they're down payment assistance programs. If you make good money, but the cash on hand is really tight and you're trying to make this happen, down payment assistance. If that's not the main problem and you're going with a more traditional, mortgage product, there's 3% down, there's 5% down, 10%, 20%, and of course you could pay all cash. So huge range there, but just know that it's really, really low if everything else, works out. Another common question is closing costs. How much do closing costs cost? And basically the very ballpark number of that in Minnesota is 3%. And that's 3% of the total purchase price of the loan. So if it's $400,000 home, that's $12,000 in closing costs. And that is a cost that, if not otherwise negotiated, is a cost to you. So you have your down payment and you have your closing costs. Let's say it's 3% down and 3% closing costs. That's 6%. On a $400,000 home, that's $24,000. That said, down payment, there's a lot of down payment assistance programs. And closing costs, it's actually quite doable to negotiate a seller to pay the closing costs. There are times in the market, there are certain homes where that might be really difficult to negotiate because you're competing against other people. But we help a lot of people buy homes where they're getting their closing costs paid and also where they're getting their down payment covered by a down payment assistance program. And so if not paying those things out of pocket is a priority to you, or if minimizing that is a priority to you, it's all good. Just let us know and we will tell you how to pursue homes where that's maybe most likely. That's a little bit complicated. It's left a little bit vague on purpose because there are some secret weapons that we use to help our clients, right? And we don't want to necessarily make that no longer a secret weapon by making it a public piece of information. Then another common question as it relates to all of this money talk is, how do you get paid? Not how do I get paid, right? How do we as a team get paid? And we get paid on commissions, and we only get paid upon a successful closing of a home. So if we show you 30 houses, if we show you 50 houses, and you don't end up finding one that you want, that's a lot of work that we're doing, but we would not actually end up collecting any payment from that. But that doesn't happen very often because we're very good at helping people get to where they want to be, helping people find a home that they love in a neighborhood that they love. And so we charge 3% for our services and for our representation. But some or all of that can be negotiated to be paid by the seller. We actually pride ourselves on being able to target homes, target properties, target listings where that is doable, and to be able to write contracts in a way that that amount can get paid and it's not necessarily an expense out of a buyer's pocket. Not every single buyer that we represent prioritizes getting that paid, so there's nuance there, but it is very possible to get some or all of that paid by the seller. The contract reads that we charge the buyer, you, 3%, and any contribution to that 3% by the sellers or the listing brokerage will reduce the buyer's obligation to that. So we'll reduce your obligation to that. So we charge you 3%. If we also negotiated 3% from the sellers, that wouldn't mean we were getting 6%. That would mean you are not paying the 3% and the sellers are paying that instead. That's how the contract is written, just so you know. And so, for example, if you were buying a $400,000 home, 3% of that is $12,000. If we negotiate that a seller pays you 3%, that means you don't pay that 3% commission at all, right? That comes directly from the seller. If we negotiate 1.5% in what's called seller's concession to the buyer broker commission, the longest air quotes of all time, then your out-of-pocket obligation for our commission, for our expenses, would be $6,000. Does that make sense? You're negotiating half of the commissions being paid by the seller, which means the other half would be your obligation. And obviously, whatever percent or dollar amount we negotiate would just be a reduction of that. That said, we couldn't ever negotiate more than that percentage, that 3%. So even if we could convince the seller to pay 3.5, there's no way that we would get that, and there's also no tricky way to like get that to go to you instead of us. So if it's important to you to limit your out-of-pocket expenses, we're very good at getting people into really good homes without paying commissions. We also pride ourselves on getting people into homes without paying commissions or without paying closing costs, right? So if you have limited upfront money or you have a decent chunk of money, but you want as much cash left over to put into the home, there's really good ways of making that happen. And that, again, that's something that we pride ourselves on. So last thought on the commission topic is that we charge a $500 administrative commission, administrative fee. It's just fundamentally, it is an additional commission that we charge. And it is considered a closing cost as well. So if we got the seller to pay closing cost, that additional piece could be considered a closing cost and could get paid by the seller, specifically the BAC more broadly. And the reason that we charge that is our files have to be compliant with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. So we take that very seriously. We have compliance standards and compliance people within our brokerage and within our team, and also with third-party transaction coordinators. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into that. And so we charge that $500 in a BAC or an admin fee, or however you want to say it. When I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, it's another $500 expense. And now we're moving on to step 3, which is arguably maybe the most fun or most exciting step in the whole process, which is basically just showings and offers. I'm going to approach this as just an FAQ section because we get a lot of questions on how this works and what to expect and all that. So that's kind of how I'll go through it. One frequently asked question is, how does this work? And we try to be as friction-free as possible with that. Like I said earlier, after that Zoom call, we set up a group text. That group text is a line of communication that is available to you. When you find a home or multiple homes, 5 homes, 10 homes that you're interested in, all you do is text it over to us, say, I'd like to see this home or these homes, etc. And we say, great, when do you want to? It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And then we arrive at the showing, we walk through the home. A lot of the process with a first-time home buyer, it's education in terms of what should you be looking out for, what are we looking out for, getting you familiar with different aspects of a home. I know that you've lived in a home, probably, so you're not completely new to the idea of a home, but the details, the potential problems, the potential nightmares, what are those things that we are paying attention to that most first-time home buyers aren't? So there's a lot of education up front. And we've even helped people who have bought many homes before, but they come from places where systems and even houses just look quite a bit different. We help people from Florida or from the Southwest where houses look a lot different, but really the systems in them are very different. There are things that are reliable that you would find in a house in Minnesota that would be very unusual to see in a climate like that. Even we've helped people from Thailand or from Europe where things look completely different. Mechanical elements change from region to region, especially country to country, but even building styles change from country to country. So we try to take an educational approach with anybody we're working with, unless, of course, they don't want it. We're not trying to over-explain things to people who are already very familiar with that stuff, but nonetheless, we'll be an extra set of eyes to catch things that maybe one person wouldn't be able to catch. So we book a showing, we meet you at the showing. Sometimes we'll drive with you, we'll pick you up from somewhere if you're from out of town and you're here for a short amount of time. But more often than not, we meet you at the showing, we open the door, and then we go through and walk around the house, looking at the inside and the outside, being critical of the home, paying attention to those main elements, the most expensive things that there are to fix. And there's kind of a whole list of those things that we're looking for. That's probably a whole different video. And you're gonna look at a lot of houses. Almost certainly you're gonna look at several houses. And if you only look at one and happen to offer on that, then you're one of the lucky ones. Very few people have to invest that little of an amount of time to find their house. Most people have to invest a lot of time and a lot of energy to find the perfect house. And I think another FAQ that people ask is, how long do people look at houses? How many houses does one have to look at before they find their home? And also kind of a sub question of, how long does it usually take from first house to under contract? What's that amount of time? The amount of time, I would say, varies super dramatically. If somebody's looking for a very unique home, I like to call them unicorns. If you're looking for a unicorn, then you might be looking for a very long time. Could be years, right? If you're looking for a unicorn in a small neighborhood, could be a decade, right? That house might not come up available very often. The unicorn is very difficult to gauge. Every now and then, maybe that could be a year, right? Somewhat reliably. If you're looking for an architecturally distinct home, then okay, maybe it would be a year. But you start to add layers of unicornness, right, to it, and more difficult things that you're looking for, then that's going to take longer and longer for you to find. But the average person, somebody looking for a home that is not a unicorn in a neighborhood that is not, super tiny, or maybe across multiple neighborhoods where there's some real variety, and it's just a matter of finding a home that is a good fit for them. I would say most people look at somewhere around 20 to 30 houses. That's a super generic number because it varies so much, but that's probably the sweet spot. There are some people who get the first house that they look at under contract. Very, very rare. Probably a unicorn situation. I'm going to stop saying unicorn, but very rare situation. And then kind of on the high end would be north of 100, right? More than 100 homes, 150 homes, that's starting to get to a lot of houses. And I've helped some people who are looking for more than 100 houses, but I think you kind of start to get jumbled in your own mind as far as what you've seen, what you like about a house, what you don't like about a house. But there certainly are situations where that would happen. Sometimes people are pretty sure they love one neighborhood, and they look and look and look for a house in that neighborhood, and then they find that the house they want doesn't exist in that neighborhood, right? And that they're not comfortable with those houses. So then they switch to a different neighborhood, or maybe they even go from looking in the city to looking in the suburb, or vice versa. And so then those numbers could go north of 100, right? Because you maybe have spent a bunch of time looking in exhausting one area and realizing, okay, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to turn my focus to a different area. And so those numbers could get pretty high. But that said, most people, 20 to 30 homes is really a common number if you're being at all cautious with how many houses you're looking at, right? There are times where we can show somebody on a weekend that they're here 20 to 40 houses in a weekend just to get this crazy base of houses of what they're looking at, so they have a good familiarity with housing stock in different neighborhoods. And that's kind of a unique situation, right? But when somebody is familiar with locations, has done the groundwork there, let's say 20 to 30. Another very common question is, what if I'm out of state? Or what if I'm busy? What if I'm working and I'm not available? We specialize in that. That's our bread and butter. That's something that we're very, very comfortable with, and something that, frankly, we wouldn't even really think twice about. It's a very, very comfortable situation for us, and we call them virtual showings. A virtual showing is very similar to a regular showing, except you're not there, right? And actually, they're typically quite a bit longer because the onus is on us to disclose and to point out and to be thorough. We can't rely on the fact that you are in the house to see it and to be critical in however your mind works to be critical. So we have to be extra critical for you. We will typically spend anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour depending on the property. An hour would be a pretty big property, probably some sizable acreage and some outbuildings. 30 to 40 minutes would be more of the sweet spot for kind of a normal home, just a single family home with a normal garage and nothing super crazy beyond that. Maybe 30 to 40 minutes. And in that, we are being very critical of the home. We're trying to point out as many flaws as we can possibly see, as many details that are good, as many details that are bad, that a flattering real estate photo wouldn't show, right? Those photographers, they're getting really good, right, at making a house look quite lovely, and then you show up in person and it feels extremely different. And that's where the virtual showing comes in. That's where our critical eye comes in, and we try really hard to make sure that we're being as honest, as transparent, as critical, but not just for the sake of being critical for the sake of disclosure, and so that you're not surprised by anything. And the beauty of the virtual showing is that we can show you as many houses as you want. You can be at home, you could be in a different country, and we can show you as many houses as you want, and you can watch those on your own time. We don't schedule a time with you to be on the other end of it. You say, can you check out this house? We say yes. We go record a video and we send you a link to a video. We have the ability to do a very fast link from a Zoom call that we record to the cloud. And we also have the ability to send you a very high quality video from a GoPro. So we're shooting both of those simultaneously. We look like weirdos when people see us at showings because we have kind of a crazy rig going on, but it's in the interest of being both fast and high quality, which unfortunately the technology does not exist to do both at this point. And then from that, if you want to write an offer, we're going to talk a little bit more about offers, but before I do that, while I'm on the virtual tour, while I'm on sort of the remote showing topic, it's very common that somebody writes an offer on a home contingent upon inspection. Right? So you haven't seen the home in person, you've seen a very thorough video, you write the offer contingent upon inspection, and that allows you to potentially, if you can swing it, right? And a lot of people just can't, make it happen logistically in a 5 to 7 day window. It's a pretty short window for the inspection period, but a lot of people can. And so if you can, I think that's the best possible scenario where you can do the search remotely. You're not coming here, you're not flying here every weekend to look at a bunch of houses. You're doing the search remotely, and then you can get under contract. Then you can come into town, and then you can know, oh, well, I'm under contract on this. Let me just make sure that the house looks and feels like what I thought it did, right? Looks and feels like how we represented it in the video. And so you could sort of have your cake and eat it too. And one note on that, this is why it's so important for us to be critical of a home. This is why it's so important for us to really nitpick a house as much as possible and disclose everything negative that we can possibly see, is because it will all come out in the wash. And we really believe that. We believe that if we are showing you a house and sugarcoating it, and then you get it under contract, and then you spend time and money to get here to look at the house, and it's not as we represented it, then we've done you a disservice as your agent, right? You as our client, we've wasted your time, we've wasted your energy, and we've wasted money in travel expenses and probably in inspection fees as well. So last thought on the showing side of things is, what should you be on the lookout for? For one, we got you. We'll be pointing this stuff out. But the big stuff is the mechanical side of things. On the outside, it's the roof, it's the siding, it's the gutters, it's the grading, it's the driveway, and the yard. Those are all potential headaches, right? All potential costs that are not necessarily what you would want to incur. On the inside, obviously the vibe, the style, that's all stuff that you're going to be paying attention to anyway. But then we have things like the mechanicals, so the HVAC system, which would be a boiler or a furnace, the air conditioner, the water heater. Sometimes there's all sorts of varieties of those things. There's humidifiers, there's air exchangers, there's water softeners. There's a lot of systems, right? In a mechanical room of a modern home, there's a ton of very smart technology happening. In an older home, there's still most of that smart technology exists and has been retrofitted since. Then of course you're looking at the foundation, right? Are there any visual signs that there's something bad happening with the foundation? My biggest negative with a foundation is a horizontal crack that goes a very long distance. And even more so if the foundation that should be stacked like this is starting to move like this. That's a sign that there's a pretty big structural issue on the horizon, right? There's a lot of pressure moving that away, and that's going to eventually not be holding up the house anymore. Then of course you want to look for water intrusion into a basement. Sometimes there's no way to really see that because it's completely finished, but most houses have some amount of unfinished basement in them. Again, it can be difficult to see behind a finished wall, but you still want to be paying attention to as much as you can. Are there soft drywall walls, right? Is there an evidence of previous water intrusion? Does the home have systems inside of it to deal with water that gets into the foundation? Mainly something called a drain tile and a sump pump. Those things are really valuable in dealing with water getting into the basement. Then inside, windows is a big one, a very expensive item that not everybody's paying attention to, right? Because some people just see a window and they just go, sure, that's a window. I see a window and I think, is that going to be a major problem or a major expense down the road? Depending on the home, replacing all the windows can be very costly. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And so if you can protect yourself against any of those items being sort of unforeseen, those are the big things to be looking for. I have a whole other video on this channel specifically about that. So you do a bunch of showings, you find a home that you like, that you're interested in, that you could see yourself living in, and you decide you want to pursue it. So how does that work? Basically, at that time, I would expect to have about a 30-minute to hour-long conversation with us, and we will talk you through a variety of terms that would go into that offer. Every house is going to be so different for what term would make sense to be using, alongside of it, because there's so many things that come into play. And so in this video, I'm not going to say, here's how to get an offer accepted. That's also something that I say for just people that we're working with. But it would also, I wouldn't even be able to tell anybody that, because it will depend on the nuances of that particular home, that listing, how it's presented to the world, how long it's been on the market, and a whole slew of other things to consider. But I will talk through just the main terms of the offer. These aren't going to be that interesting or that juicy, but just a good foundation for things that you're going to know, that you're going to have to keep track of, or that you're going to have to be considering when the time comes. Number one is purchase price. That's obvious. How much total are you going to be buying the house for? Number two is earnest money. I think of earnest money as a deposit on your down payment. The next one is down payment, and that's the total amount of cash that you're going to pay toward the loan. So if you're doing a 5% down loan, then 5% is your down payment. So depending on what the purchase price of the home is, 5% of that. And earnest money would typically be a smaller chunk of that down payment. And that money will typically go and sit in an escrow account from when you're under contract to closing date, and it will fundamentally reduce how much money you have to bring to close, right? Let's say your total down payment was $10,000 and your earnest money was $5,000. Within 2 days of being under contract, you have to submit your earnest money, $5,000. So boom, that's gone out of your pocket into an escrow account. Now closing day comes, your total down payment was $10,000. You have the $5,000 that reduces that into $5,000, and then you have now $5,000 out of pocket on closing day. It doesn't change your out of pocket amount, but it is money that you part ways with earlier. And fundamentally, it's an act of good faith. It's telling the sellers, hey, I mean business, I really want this house, I'll part ways with this money, you can keep it in that account. And in the event that I, as a buyer, were to bail for any reason not laid out in this purchase agreement, if I were to break the contract, then you get to keep that earnest money. The good news is in Minnesota, purchase agreements, real estate is very friendly to the buyer. You can back out during your inspection period for any reason at all, which brings up contingencies. There are quite a few contingencies that could come up in real estate. And contingency fundamentally means like option period, or it fundamentally means like this purchase agreement depends on a few things happening, right? And the most common thing is inspection. And so by saying an offer is contingent upon inspection, what that means is I'd like to buy this house for this agreed upon price, but I'm going to get an inspection. And depending on what the inspection says, I don't have to move forward with this house, right? Or I can negotiate different terms based on the inspection, contingent upon the inspection. So inspection is the big one. It's the most common one, and you hear about it a lot. Specifically, you hear that some people waive inspection. In Minnesota, it is legal to waive inspection. We don't recommend it. We'll never be the one saying, yeah, you should do that, because it's not safe. It's a very risky thing to do, but if it's within your risk tolerance, then you're welcome to do it in the state of Minnesota. And in your inspection contingency, you can choose how many days you want to have to perform that inspection. Just to set sort of like a basic ground rule, it's not really a rule, but 10 days is generally perceived as a very long time. It's about as long as I've ever gotten accepted, pending a very weird situation. And 7 days is kind of more of like a normal, okay, that's not too long. 5 days is a little speedier and certainly is doable. Anything faster than 5 days starts to get into what I would consider a very fast turnaround for most people's inspections. Then you have other contingencies like contingent upon the sale of a home. So if you have a home to sell in Florida, then you might have to sell that home before the lender will give you the financing, because they don't want you to have that outstanding debt on that home and also buying this new home. Even if you say, well, I'm going to sell that home, the lender's like, cool, sell it first, and then I'll give you this money. And sometimes the lender isn't even the person who's requiring it. It's just a buyer says, yeah, I would prefer not to possess two homes at one time, right? I would like to sell the one, buy another one, and never really hold them both, because that just increases risk for that person. It's also possible to make an offer on a home contingent upon the seller finding a home of their choice. That's a difficult one to make, in my opinion, because it's very difficult to know what the seller is looking for. Are they looking for a unicorn in a unicorn neighborhood? I said I was going to stop saying that. But if they were looking for a very rare property in a very rare neighborhood, then that might take a really long time. So if you're thinking, cool, I want to move in 2 months, assuming this person finds the home they're looking for, how do you know that they're not looking for something that is wild? How do you know that they don't have unreasonable expectations? Which actually speaks to the contingent upon the sale of a home. That offer can be difficult to get accepted because as a seller, how do you know that the buyer of your home doesn't have unreasonable expectations about what their home is going to sell for? And then last thought on contingencies, there's a kind of an infinite amount of contingencies. It could be contingent upon, Punxsutawney Phil seeing his shadow, right? That would be a wild offer, but it technically could happen. And kind of my last thought on that is that you could technically make an offer that is contingent upon the successful cancellation of another offer. Maybe you got 123 Main Street under contract and it's not going so well in the inspection and you're having a hard time negotiating it, or it's not looking too hot. And so instead you find a house, let's say 456 Main Street, that you like a little bit more, and you say, I'd like to offer on this house, but in order to buy this purchase agreement has to get canceled. So also another strange contingency, and those basically continue on ad infinitum. So I will stop boring you with those things. Another term to consider is financing type. It's something that you have to include. So are you a cash offer, conventional offer, FHA offer, VA, Veterans Affairs, USDA, more rural style loans? What type of loan is that? And there are even kind of stranger loans. You also have to say, does it include a down payment assistance program or any kind of help like that? Those boxes to be checked in the purchase agreement. And then you also have to lay out which personal property items you want to convey with the home. Most of the time in Minnesota, this means appliances. And one interesting fact is that in Minnesota, basically, most of the time, the huge majority of the time, all of the appliances will convey. All of the major appliances will convey. So imagine a home that has a refrigerator, a range, a microwave, a dishwasher, a washer, and a dryer. That package is really common for that whole thing to convey, right? To come with the home more simply. And I know that there are other states where it's really unusual for, say, a refrigerator to convey. That seems like a nightmare to me. I don't know why anybody would want to have to move a refrigerator, let alone a whole state who says, let's all agree that we move our refrigerators. That seems crazy to me, but it's how it works in some states. Here, that's not the case. Most of the time, you would write the refrigerator in and nobody would think twice about it. Unless somebody just got a refrigerator that they loved. They might say, fridge doesn't come with because we're taking it where we're going because it's this newfangled thing with, a touch screen and a camera inside and stuff like that. And that's what they want. But then there are appliances, for example, that are less common to convey, where maybe it's a more specialized appliance. Maybe it's a chest freezer in the basement. And the seller uses that really common to store whatever, bodies. Or like a huge wine refrigerator or wine cooler is probably the better term, which that's really specific to that seller, no pun intended. Then there might be some things that are a little bit more on the fence of, are they part of the home? Are they considered a fixture? A fixture is very fundamentally defined in the purchase agreement as anything that is permanently affixed to the home. So you would argue that if something was screwed in and couldn't be taken out without removing the screw, that is a fixture, right? So if a picture is on a picture hook and you can lift it up, not a fixture, right? That's a decor item. If a TV, this is kind of where it gets confusing, if a TV's on an entertainment center and is sitting there, not a fixture. If a TV was permanently mounted to the wall, that's a fixture, but actually most TVs, even if they're on a wall mount, they're not actually permanently mounted to the wall. You can usually pull a couple strings and pull it off. That would not be considered a fixture, but the wall mount itself is. So it's really common that a home will trade and there just will be wall mounts on the wall. And that's legal and that's how it ought to be. That's how it's defined in the purchase agreement. So if as a buyer, you specifically didn't want the wall mount to be on the wall when you bought the house, you would have to write in specifically that you ask for them to remove it or that the seller agree to remove all TV wall mounts or something like that. I will say though, then you get into kind of a strange language territory where do they then have to patch it and how good do they have to patch it? So personally, I hate bad patches on a wall. It drives me crazy. And I wouldn't really trust a seller to do a really good job on it. So I would rather take the house with the wall mount still on the wall, remove it on my own, and I would rather patch it myself or pay somebody who is really good to patch it and just pay for that after I take possession of the home. Other furniture items and other personal property can convey with the sale of a home, but it sort of has to be treated as a separate transaction. So if you wanted a sofa in the basement, we can help negotiate that for you, and there can be an amendment drafted up for it. It just has to live sort of aside from the purchase agreement. And the big reason is that a lender doesn't want to think that they're paying an extra $10,000 for a sofa and a coffee table and a bed and whatever, right? The lender is trying to lend on the home and not the personal property. The lender doesn't want any of the language to make it look like that's what they're paying for. So you could have a separate agreement where you agree that you'll pay, let's say, $2,000 cash for a sofa, a TV, a coffee table, and a bed frame. Right, but that's just a separate thing. We can help do that, and we can also help exchange the funds accordingly on closing day or whatever. And we can help exchange the funds on closing day or however it's agreed upon there. Now, there's a few other terms that don't apply to every transaction, but they're good to know that they exist. And so the first of that is a deadline. You can say, here's this offer, it expires on Tuesday at 5 p.m., right? That is perfectly legal to do in an offer. And there are pros and cons to doing that. There's also something called an escalation clause. An escalation clause I like to think of like max bid on eBay. If you're familiar with that, it basically means that, let's say a house is priced at $400,000. You would say, I will pay $400,000, but I also will beat any other proven net offer up to $450,000. That way, if somebody came in at $425,000, If you're comfortable paying $430, then you would win that. Not every listing agent likes that. Some don't allow them. Not every seller likes that. Some will not allow them. I think they're dinosaurs and that they should. That's too much. I think they're misguided and that they should. I think that the escalation clause is a very helpful tool in real estate, especially in a multiple offer situation. I'm a big fan of them. We use them when possible, but there are a lot of things to consider, which we will tell you as we're talking through an offer. Another one of these terms is called an appraisal guarantee. Not a fun term to include. Nobody wants to include an appraisal guarantee. What an appraisal guarantee says is that when the lender hires an appraiser and the appraiser comes out, if that appraiser says that the home is worth less than what I'm paying for it, I will pay out of pocket some amount of cash to pay the difference, right? So if the home was listed at $400,000 and you offered $450,000 for it, and the appraiser came back and said, it's only worth $430,000. I'm looking at the comps, it's only worth $430,000. There's a $20,000 delta there. If you said, no matter what, I'll pay the difference, then you would be on the hook for an extra $20,000 in cash, right? But you also might have just said, I'll pay $5,000 to pay the difference, which would mean that there still would be a $15,000 delta, and you would have to renegotiate with the seller. But at least you've agreed to cover a $5,000 gap. If you did $10,000, same thing. There's still a $10,000 delta, but at least you've agreed to meet them halfway in that particular situation. An appraisal guarantee helps to get an offer accepted, but in the event of a low appraisal, there's no actual guarantee that if there's still a delta, that you will in fact close. There still could be some renegotiation that would have to occur in that situation. And then one last term, this is maybe a little more out there, not everybody uses them. They're called inspection guarantees. Basically what an inspection guarantee says is that you as a buyer have agreed to buy this home for X price, contingent upon inspection, let's say a 5-day inspection, and with the inspection guarantee, what you're saying is we're not gonna ask for items under a certain amount, right? We'll cover whatever the inspector finds, we'll cover up to a certain amount of that. Again, not a very fun term to include as a buyer because you'd like to maintain some of your negotiating position, but it can be a very helpful term because the seller would like the idea that they're not going to be nickeled and dimed. So then you submit your offer with all of those terms, however you wanna, whatever levers you wanna pull, you submit the offer. And once you submit the offer, there are fundamentally 3 things that can occur. The seller can accept the offer, the seller can counter the offer, or the seller can just flat out reject the offer. The rejection typically will happen if you're in multiple offers and they go with another offer, or if you offer really low. If it's not a very good offer, they might not even counter. They might just say, try again, because you're not even close, right? It's happened. I've helped people make offers like that, and yeah, sometimes they just go, nah, we're not going to do that. And the counter would basically just be that they say, okay, we would like to work with you, but we would like these terms to change. Sometimes that's purchase price, right? And sometimes the counter, you're way, way far off on purchase price, and you're probably not going to come together. But very often, if a seller counters, it says that they're interested in dancing, right? They'd like to play ball. And so hopefully y'all can sort of arrive at a situation where both sides are comfortable. And then obviously, if it's accepted, you're good. You're under contract and you enter your contingency period if you have one. And once you are under contract, you also enter the kind of glorious region that is called escrow. Escrow is basically just what you call from being under contract to close. There's also other things that escrow means, but for now, that's what it means in this situation. Which then brings us to step 4, which I would just call being under contract, and sort of that wraps in your contingencies, right? There's a lot of contingencies, but most of the time we're talking the inspection contingency. Or at least that's the first one that you have to be thinking about. So once you're under contract, step 1 is send over earnest money. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but that has to be due within 2 days or so of being under contract. And then you would schedule your inspection. We have great inspectors that we love to use who do a very, very good job, and we vetted and we trust as good as any inspector we've ever used. we trust these inspectors. And when you get an inspection, there's sort of multiple layers to the inspection onion. There's the main inspection, which costs somewhere between $500 and $700, depending on the size of the house. These are ballpark numbers. That's where they're going to look at the whole house, all the main systems, the roof, the windows, everything we talked about before. They're going to take a much deeper, more thorough look because they have ladders and they have moisture meters and things like that. They can really take a lot of time to be paying attention to these things. They're going to test every single socket, every single light bulb, right? Kind of a crazy level of detail. Then there's other sort of a la carte add-on items. There's a radon inspection. Radon is a low-lying gas. It's bad for you. The inspection takes a couple days, costs a few $100s. In Minnesota, the likelihood of radon being present in a home that doesn't have a radon system, I think of it, it's pretty much a coin flip. It's a 50-50 shot. Is this house going to be high in radon or low in radon? There's no way to know. You could never look at a house and have any idea. So it's really, really worth getting that tested. The good news is, if it comes back high, radon mitigation isn't all that costly. It's not too massive of an issue. And if we can catch it in inspection, it's been my experience that it's a pretty easy request to ask the sellers for. It's like, we got you. We caught you, and you didn't know it, but you had radon. You had high radon. Then the next a la carte item is a sewer line scope. Not a very cool thing to do, but it's very important in my opinion, especially in older homes. I would say houses older than 1970, it becomes exceedingly important. And basically they have just a machine that's a camera on a long tube, and they send it down the sewer line, and it takes a really good look at the sewer line. It's usually, depending on the length of it, maybe 10 minutes long or so. And they're kind of slowly working their way down, looking at the condition of the sewer as they go further and further down the sewer until it meets with the city. Once it meets with the city, that's the city's thing, right? And so they're not looking beyond that, but they're saying, okay, this line from inside the house to where it connects with the city, what's the condition of that? Is there going to be a problem down the line? No pun intended. Sewer line inspection, very much worth doing in my opinion. And there's a few other a la carte items that I would say are less common to perform in Minnesota. Not to say you couldn't, and not saying you shouldn't, just saying that they are less common. One is an airborne mold test. They put up a little device that just sits there and collects the air, right? It's kind of strange, but it just sits and waits until the air comes in contact with it, and then they test that and they see how much of different types of molds showed up on that test. Then there's a mold swab test, which would be more of if there was a visual sign of some sort of bacterial growth. Some people are inclined to get a mold swab test, but you first have to tell them where you want swabbed. So if you don't see anything, it can be difficult to tell them, hey, go take a test, because they don't know. They don't know what they should be swiping, basically. So the airborne mold might tell you that there is like a high level of mold in the air, although I will say, me and my team, we've never had one of those come back high. But that's not to say they can't. We just have not yet come across that. But if that came back high, then it might kind of alert your senses, right? To be like, well, where is that hiding? Where is that coming from? So if there's no visual mold, but high airborne mold, that might be cause for concern. You wouldn't even know how to deal with it. If there was visual mold and no airborne mold, that mitigation becomes maybe a little bit easier to consider, right? Where it goes, okay, we get rid of that spot, and then potentially there's not going to be airborne mold. If there was visual mold, you got it tested and you hadn't done an airborne mold yet, but the visual mold came back as positive, then you might want to do an airborne mold, right, to sort of dive in a little bit further to that. I've said mold a lot of times now, so I think that's all I'll say it. Then there's a disease tree inspection, which if there was a tree that looked particularly unwell in a yard and you were worried about cutting it down, or just a tree that didn't look particularly unwell but was in a very, very precarious position, you might also want to get that tested to be like, I want to make sure this thing isn't like about to fall, right? And so they have contractors basically that they would hire to do a disease tree test. Could be worth doing. We don't do that many of them, right? But we also are pretty good at pointing out trees that look like they're going to be a problem. Then there's a lead-based paint test where if you were thinking that a certain area was lead-based paint, or let's say there was siding on a house that was in horrendous shape and you knew one of the first things you were going to do was replace that siding, you might want to get a lead-based paint test run on that siding, because you're like, well, I'm going to do that, so is that going to be more of a headache for me down the road because there's lead-based paint on this? If there was, the truth is it would be more of a headache. It would just be more costly, right? So lead-based paint test, either indoors or outdoors. But again, it's kind of one of those things, other than doing a really comprehensive lead-based paint test or inspection, you kind of have to have an idea of where do you want them to test? Where are you wondering in particular if that is lead-based paint? Same with asbestos, right? As agents, we're pretty good at identifying a handful of things that are likely to contain asbestos. I can almost certainly identify a few things as saying that is asbestos-based. There's floor tiles, there's ceiling tiles, there's plumbing wraps, there are types of insulation, and then there is siding. Those are the things that I can most reliably point out and say, I think that's asbestos-based. But there's quite a few other things that could be. If the general inspector calls something out and says that's likely to contain asbestos, and you know you're going to do something with that area, then you could also get a specific test of, does this thing contain asbestos? So that's another one of the a la carte items. And then the last a la carte item would be a well and septic inspection. It probably goes without saying that a well and septic test only occurs on a house that has both a well and septic. You could just have a house with a well, and you could probably also just have a house with a septic. I tend to find well is more likely, just a well is more likely. And a well test would be testing the well water and the sanitary nature of that water. Sometimes animals fall down into wells and they die, and they poison wells. Hence the term poisoning the well. And then a septic test is a pretty involved look at a septic tank and a septic system. Again, those only apply to houses that have those things. And so during your inspection contingency, you've performed whatever assortment of those inspections, and now you also have to negotiate with the seller. If you want to ask for any requests following the inspection, which I would say most people make some requests, right? Some people make a ton of requests. Some people are almost afraid to make any request. I would say most people make some kind of a request, even if it's a really, really small thing that would just be an inconvenience. But during your inspection contingency, it's also your time to do some due diligence, right? Maybe there's not something that was being tested, but something that you noticed during the showing, and you said, I'd like for them to clarify that some system works, maybe speakers, maybe household speakers or something like that. Let's say during the inspection walkthrough, you noticed something that you hadn't noticed previously. Maybe a piece of furniture that you thought was fixed to the wall, and you said, shoot, I really thought that thing was going to be coming with. I thought that was a built-in, but it's not. That might be a time where you say, hey, I was pretty sure that this was a built-in, so I didn't include this. But now that we're in the inspection period, while we still have our contingency available to us, I'd like to make sure that that item will convey. The seller might say, whoa, I love that thing. That is not conveying. And then you can negotiate accordingly. You can say, well, I was pretty sure it was a fixture, and I'd like for it to come with. And if they say no, you could say, well, I feel like I'm not kind of getting the whole house that I thought I was going to get. Can I get some kind of concession or something like that? These are kind of strange examples, but stuff like this does come up. I'm never not surprised by the strangeness of things that comes up, the amount of just pure original thought that comes out of negotiating during an inspection. And so if you have a 7-day inspection window, you have to negotiate everything in that 7 days. And then once you've gotten through your inspection contingency, let's say it's a 7-day, day 8, you enter what's called a pending status. Pending fundamentally means no more contingencies, and this is only pending financing or pending underwriting, right? Just making sure that the loan, the financing that we have in place is going to get through. But really what it just means is pending a successful close. And in this pending status is when typically the lender will get an appraisal performed, right? So there's no separate status for appraisal, although there are contingencies on financing. Once you're in pending status, the lender will typically order the appraisal. The appraiser will come out. That could take 1, 2, or 3 weeks, depending on how backed up the appraiser is or the appraisers are, depending on how busy the market is. And then with the appraisal also comes underwriting. Underwriting is just the lenders taking a really, really good look at the house and taking a really good look at your financial situation and making sure that they're not about to lend on a home that's going to be a problem, right? Or lend to a borrower, you, who's going to be a problem, who's not going to pay. At the same time as appraisal and underwriting with the lender, there's also title search that's being performed, which is in Minnesota, we typically use title companies. We have the best title company that we work with. They're amazing. And they're looking at the title and the history of the home. And fundamentally, they're just making sure that the sellers who are selling you a home have the right to sell that home. And also that they're not selling you something that maybe they got that has a problem. There's something called a cloud on title or an encumbrance. A cloud on title or an encumbrance is fundamentally the same thing. It's basically just a strange history or a trading of hands or something strange that occurred with the property, with the historical record of the property that doesn't seem quite right. That just doesn't match up with what maybe the sellers are saying they're selling. Maybe 2 sellers ago, somebody parceled off a piece of land and they sold a 60-acre lot, but they parceled it into 3 20-acre lots. And now you have a 20-acre lot that somebody sold as, 4 5-acre lots. But the seller of this is saying that they have a 30-acre lot. It's like, well, no, you bought it as a 5-acre lot and you're wrong about what your property is. That'd be a very rare situation. That doesn't happen that often. But a cloud on title or an encumbrance, they're just making sure that the home that's being traded is being traded exactly how it should be. They're well worth their money. And a title company will also provide something called a title insurance policy. And that's actually probably required by the lender. In fact, I think in Minnesota, it's required with every single transaction that you're paying some sort of a title insurance policy.
What's the fact?
Jack.
Just read about it.
Sick, okay. And that way, if you did buy a home that John bought from Ralph and Ralph screwed up something in the title or whatever, the title company way back then or the attorney way back then screwed up, that way you are not going to be on the hook for something that somebody screwed up a long time ago or that the title company didn't catch this time, right? Once the title search and the appraisal and the underwriting is all done, the title company and the lenders are talking kind of in the background the whole time, then they're going to provide something called a closing disclosure. A closing disclosure is required within 3 days of the closing so that you have ample time to look it over. And also the title company is going to make sure that their numbers match. And there's actually going to be a title company on the sell side and the buy side. They're going to be talking to each other and make sure that their numbers match. And that way there's kind of multiple checks along the way to make sure that everybody is consistent all the way through. After the closing disclosures are provided, then there's something called a final walkthrough. The final walkthrough is typically going to take place the evening before closing or the day of closing. Legally, the sellers have all the way up until closing to live in the house, right? You can't make a seller not spend the night at their house the night before closing. Even if it makes you uncomfortable that they're not all the way out and the house isn't, cleaned before the evening before, it's their right to live in that house. So sometimes final walkthrough happens the evening before. And if it's empty, it's a pretty good peace of mind. But sometimes the seller is going to be there until the morning and they're going to be moved out at noon. And then you just have to say, and we help you coordinate that final walkthrough. That final walkthrough can happen right at noon. But obviously, you have to have time for the final walkthrough, drive time to the title company for the closing, and then time to close. So that can't get too late, but these things are things that we're communicating, ahead of time. So hopefully you're not getting surprised by these things. The purchase agreement says that the seller agrees to give possession to the buyer, you, with the house free of personal property and debris, right? So all debris removed and free of personal property. And that's basically saying they don't have to clean it. They just have to take all their stuff out. Debris, what is debris? I would argue that debris is something akin to being swept clean, right? It's no trash. It's no, certainly no personal property, but like when does trash cross over into personal property? At that point, it's just debris. It doesn't matter, right? It's just extra crap that's laying around, and you don't want that there because you're buying the house, you're moving in soon or whatever, right? And so your final walkthrough, you're making sure that they've done that they removed debris, they removed personal property, and they're not leaving anything behind that they're kind of sneakily hoping that you don't catch. And you're making sure that the house has not seen any major damage. You're making sure that it's in relatively the same shape as when you agreed to buy it in the first place, when you first saw it. You're making sure that there's running water. You're probably going to test hot water. You're going to test the electricity, different light switches, and things like that. You're going to make sure that appliances are on, that a gas stove turns on, that the air conditioner or heat is running accordingly. In the winter, you can't test AC. In the summer, heat can be somewhat difficult to tell if it's working, if it's a really hot day, because it's just more hot air coming out. But those things, you're testing those. You're testing, do you actually get hot water? Again, are appliances running? Are there no holes in the walls? And are there missing fixtures? Right? Did the seller take something that was clearly affixed to the home? And if you have proof that they took something that was a fixture, whether there's a crazy hole in the wall that makes it obvious or something like that, then hopefully you have some time to negotiate. Or that can be a real like, okay, all this stuff has to start happening really quick. We have to come to an agreement. We have to find a solution for this in a very short amount of time. But nonetheless, that's what the final walkthrough is for. Or you're pushing closing. And pretty much nobody ever wants to push closing back. Then you have the closing or the closing day, depending on what day your final walkthrough happened. But closing day is a good day. It's a celebration for most people. Every now and then there's a bit of stress in the air. There's a bit of, people are a bit riled up. But most of the time, it's a good feeling. People are excited to get their home and sort of move on to just living a normal life, feeling like they're not in limbo anymore. And hopefully it's a really exciting day. You found a home that you are really, really in love with. And that's a very exciting day for us as real estate agents. It's a very fun thing to be a part of. We meet you at the title company most of the time, unless you're closing remotely, which is kind of another conversation. We meet you at the title company. You sign a bunch of documents that the title company and the lenders have for you to sign. And once you've signed all of that and the title company has dispersed the money, then you officially own the home. It's yours to do with. I like to say that you could paint it fuchsia if you want, but that's really just to illustrate the fact that like it is proper yours. There's no like, oh, well, does the bank have to? No, it's yours, right? At that point, it is your house. And a couple things to keep in mind. The seller only has to remove personal property and have the house be free of debris. So you might want to hire a cleaner. If you don't want to take possession of like a house that's like not in perfect shape, hiring a cleaner for a move-in clean is a really, really good idea, and definitely worth thinking about if you have the means to, and if you don't want to do it yourself. Otherwise, I would expect to go in, do a super, super deep clean yourself. If you enjoy doing it or you want to, or that's kind of your only option, then definitely go in there, get after it. Some sellers will choose to hire a cleaner, and that's really nice. And that's like a gift. Think of that as just a gift. It's not something they have to do, although it is nice and probably good karma or good juju or whatever you want to call it. They don't have to, right? You've only agreed that it would be free of personal property and debris. So make sure that you have a plan to clean it to some degree. And so on the closing day, we are there typically. If you're there, we're there to hand you the key. Congratulations, you now own the home. And one of the big things that we like to say is like, just because we're closed and sort of our job is done, right? We've gotten you to this point, which is the goal. We're not now unavailable. If something comes up, if you have a question for the seller, if you have a question for title company or a lender or something like that, if you have a question, reach out to us. And we try really hard to let people know that we're still on your team even after closing occurs. Sometimes things come up. Sometimes a buyer takes possession of a home and something really random comes up that wasn't disclosed and seems like maybe it should have been disclosed, we want you to know that we're still on your team. And we will do our very best to continue to represent you, to continue to help you in that situation. Just because we got paid doesn't mean we're done helping you, right? You are our client throughout the process, throughout the whole home buying process, and we still think about you as our client after closing. And if you're still watching, first of all, my God, thank you. This is a very long video. It took me a really long time, but don't click away. Please do me a big favor. If you haven't done so yet, hit the thumbs up button. It helps the algorithm. It helps this video get in front of more people. And if you have found this as helpful as I've tried to make it be, that's a weird sentence. I'm a little lagged here. Give the video a thumbs up. Leave a comment of some sort. And if you want to work with us, we'd love to help. You can go to our website, tothetwincities.com. We have a contact form that you can fill out in like 30 seconds or less. Again, it's been a pleasure. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.